All right, gang. Welcome to the weekly Mac Forum video chat. I hope that you are enjoying your weekend as it's coming to a close here. Sunday, um, August the 7th. We're about a minute behind schedule, but that's okay. I think we can cope and make up for it here. I had a minor technical issue to take care of. All right. Before we jump right into things, let's get right into this week's show with some information that you might want to be aware of. First of all, as you can see, I've got the main forum page up here, and I'm gonna just check in real quick and see. And it looks like our current newest member is looks like GM Kretz. So welcome to them, and I know that we've had a number of new members join in the last week. So I want to welcome all of those guys. And as you can see, we currently have over 296,000 threads going in the forum. So I'm sure you'll find information there that'll be really helpful to you. Uh, Keep in mind that if you want to ask a question, the way to go about doing that is to join the forum and go ahead and post your question. The contact us area is not really a great place to post your Mac related questions. It's great for forum related issues, login problems, things like that, but not so much for the other types of questions because the only people that see the contact us threads are the moderators and administrators. So if you've got a question about your Mac or about your iPhone or about the way things operate, go ahead and join the forum and post away, ask your question. Uh, do recommend doing a forum search because sometimes your question's been answered. Someone else has had the same problem and asked the same or similar question. So go ahead and dive right in there. And let's take a look now and see what we have going on in this week. On the forum, basically, it's been a typical week, just lots of questions here and there, backup issues, cloning issues, how to go about doing that, different problems with installing, uninstalling things, and of course, the occasional comment or question about antivirus software and malware. So, lots of good information there. And let's go ahead and dive right into some of the rest of the Apple information. And later on in the show, I'll have an iTunes tip for you that I think will bring back a feature or help you with a feature that used to be available in iTunes. And I'm going to show you a way that you might be able to get some of that functionality back. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and bring up iTunes right here and minimize it for a moment to get it out of our way. All right. First of all, this week, as I was trolling around looking for things to talk about, I ran across um, an article from Cult of Mac about 10 awesome iOS photo editing apps that they're suggesting you try. I know for me, I don't spend a lot of time photo editing anymore. Not as much as I used to. I'd like to get back into that, but every time I say I'm going to start playing with that and experimenting and try to learn a little bit more, I get busy with some other kind of project. And as a general rule, in the past, I've preferred to do that kind of editing on my Mac as opposed to right there on the iOS gizmo. So I haven't followed that area very much, but you might find it very interesting, very helpful. Also, there and as I say, there's a good selection of apps on there. These are some of their top tens. I see a couple that I recognized and used, and lo and behold, there's some that are free here. Uh, Free can't beat free. Okay, I've used Pixelmator before. I like it. Several of the others I have not used, but there's a good assortment. I recognize most of these names as, you know, software that friends of mine have used, and software that's been around for a little while, has a good reputation. So take a look at some of those and see if there's something that floats your boat. And go ahead and comment on some of these in the forum and let us know what you think about them. On another front here, as you can see, this was a story that came out. And let's see, this is Ars Technica, which is usually a pretty good site for tech related information. And this one caught my attention. I didn't make it all the way through their site this week. I rarely do, but it says starting this fall, Apple will pay up to $200,000 for iOS and iCloud bugs, basically testing to find iOS and iCloud bugs. Now, before you all go rush out and try to collect that 200 grand, let me clarify something. This right now, what they're shooting at is some of the security researchers that are constantly probing operating systems and what I call backside and support systems for bugs. That's where the program is targeted now. Is getting those guys to help them. Sometimes you see these guys referred to as white hat hackers, uh, and a lot of different companies sometimes pay these guys to help them. And I say guys in the generic sense of the word, obviously, um, to help them probe security issues and see if they've got everything squared away. So apparently, they are looking at the possibility of expanding this over time if it proves fruitful. And it's going to be interesting to see what comes of that. I know that in the past, some of the researchers in question have contacted Apple and let them know about different problems that have popped up in the in research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that has allowed Apple to plug these holes either before release or very early on in the game. So that's going to be interesting to see what comes of that. I'm always kind of interested in paying attention to what goes on there because the issues that get identified by Apple, Microsoft, Google, all these providers, whether they identify them or a third party does, uh, the nice thing about it is that means that the end product is a little more stable, a little more robust security wise, and that's always a positive thing. So this is just one more step that they're taking. They seem to be interested in taking to get that uh, program a little bit farther along. All right, and here I linked to Kirk McLaren's Kirkville site tonight in the notes because what he's saying in this particular article is going to link to something that I'm going to discuss in a minute in the tips and tricks segment. First of all, I like a lot of what Kirk has written because, first of all, he's sane. Um, Second, and his explanations, he understands uh, I think from both sides, the typical user and the power user. And I think although he's got a good overall understanding of the computer use, I think he leans a little more toward those of us that are using them as media playback, media control. He seems to have really have that be a little more focused. And one of the things that he's approaching here in this particular article that I linked to is the storage needs. How, this can get out of hand quickly. Most of us have 4 or 5 external drives laying around with stuff, and we're stuck with the issues of, do we get larger external drives? Do we get these network attached storage devices and put multiple drives in them, kind of consolidate things in one place? And when you start gathering more and more data, then your backup plan has to kind of accommodate that. For example, you could set up Time Machine to back up your stuff. Well, when you do that, that means that, let's say you got a gigabyte of data and you set Time Machine to back up that data. You need another drive that's a little bit larger than the original. So that's another, let's say, gig and a half or 2 gigabyte drive. And now you've got Time Machine working. You've got your primary data, which was 1 gig. You've got this backup from Time Machine that's a gig or gig and a half drive. And then, in theory, to be really safe, you should have some kind of off-site backup, so that if you have some kind of catastrophe or something of that nature, that you've got this off-site backup. I have a friend who his uh, notion of off-site backup is to do the following. He has his original data on his Mac. He makes a backup of that data, and then periodically he will take his backup drive, bring it down to his local bank where he has a safe deposit box, put that backup drive in the safe deposit box, grab the other drive that's in there, come back and update the backup. And so he's always got one drive off site that is uh, reasonably current. It may be a week behind, it may be 2 weeks behind. How important that is that it be exactly current depends on what you're backing up and what you're using that data for. Obviously, if you are using, if you were a business, for example, and you wanted to do offsite backup, your offsite backups have to be kept more current than that, obviously, because you don't want to lose, say, a week's worth of sales and records of sales and records of people, that customers that you need to ship things to. So the backup strategy is going to depend a little bit on your needs. And the reason that what Kurt um, talked about with backups caught my attention is, very simply, in here he mentions that he talks a little bit about his backup strategy. And he happens to mention that at one time, I think it's in this particular article, up through, I believe it was iTunes 10, you could back up your iTunes collection relatively easy to CDs, and it had a function in it that basically said backup to disk. Well, as of, I believe, the beginning of iTunes 11, that backup to disk function is gone, but you can still kind of halfway create it, cobble it together. And I'll show you that in just 1 second. Before we do that, let's move on to the other article that that Kirk mentions. Now, here's the one on backing up iTunes Media. Okay, but the other article that I wanted to mention to you this week from Kirk has to do with one that he did for Macworld, where he talks about some other issues with tagging and what do you do if you've got multiple things by the same artist, for example, how you can fix that and kind of consolidate that. I'll have a link to that one. I don't have that one up in the browser window right now, but I'll have a link to that in the show notes. His written description, I think, is better than anything that I could describe verbally. All right. So let me take one more quick note uh, before we get into this week's tip. Um, NBC Sports is doing streaming of the Olympics. If you're a big Olympic fan, that's an important deal to you. Summer Olympic sports are a big deal to some people. And Cult of Mac has an article on some of your streaming options for uh, streaming the live streaming Olympic content. And it mentions not only the Apple TV, but as you can see, Sling TV. Some of these options you can do without having a cable television plan. And the reason that I mentioned that I linked to this article is that on some of these streaming options, the first time you go, you can see, I think the article said a half an hour of streamed content. But then each day after that, you're tied to, I think it's 5 minutes on some of these streaming deals. So this gives you a good overview of some of your options, particularly if you do not have cable. And I wanted to link to that for those of you that are interested. All right, so let's move on now to the tip that I told you I was going to talk about a little bit tonight. I mentioned iTunes. Let me bring that up for you. All right. In the old days, iTunes had an option that let you back up your music to disk. And if you went to the file menu, you had that option. Well, now you see right now, backup to disk is not there anymore. But there is a burn playlist to disk function. So here's something that might meet your needs. I'm going to go ahead and just eject a couple things here to kind of clean things up. And you what you might think that I'm going to suggest to you is go to the recently played list that Apple has set up and just select that and then do a burn to disk. Okay, burn playlist to disk. But here's the problem with that. Look at this. Now, here is the last 3 months, the last 6 months. This goes back to things that have been added in the last year. And I can't really edit this too much to tell it. I can edit it a little bit, but I don't have a lot of control over what gets backed up if I do it that way. So here's another way that I tried, and it seems to work for some of the things that I do. All right, I'm going to go here. As you can see, I'm not going to use the recently played playlist. As you can see, I've got a number of uh, smart playlists here. I've already created a smart playlist here that has some things in it. Did earlier. Let's see if I can find it again. As you can see, I've got playlists for all different kinds of music, different genres of music. So let's go back and recreate the one. I don't want to do purchased music because some of this I've already backed up. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start a new smart playlist. And the reason I'm going to start a new smart playlist is I want this to be able to update itself. I don't want to have to keep track of what I've added since the last time I did a backup. So here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to open up the smart playlist as you saw from the file menu. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to choose to do this playlist based on date added. Okay. And then I'm going to change this so that if the date added is after, and just for the sake of argument, I'm going to put in here June 1st, just to give you an example of this year. Now, as you can see, here's a list of everything that I've added since June 1st. Okay. And it's going to tell me down at the bottom here how many songs are involved, how long it would take to play it, and importantly, how many gigabyte of data I need to back up this playlist. Now, as you can see, this will take a little bit more than one DVD. I've got a little more than 5 gigabyte here, so it would take one and part of a second one unless I'm using a dual layer. And I can name this playlist. I'm just going to name it Backup. I'm going to reuse this in a minute, and you'll see how. Okay. Now, I've got everything set to go. If I go up to the File menu and choose Burn Playlist to Disk, I can now start the burning process. All right. Now, I'm not going to take time this evening to illustrate that. That's pretty straightforward, as you can see from the menu. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's assume now that the burn has been completed. Now, I'm going to go back today, it being August 7th. I'm going to go back and say edit the playlist. Okay. I'm going to go here and I'm going to edit the playlist, edit smart playlist. I'm going to change that date to today. Okay. 8 7 of 2016. I'm going to leave this the way it is. Okay. Now, look what happens. There's nothing here because I haven't added anything today. So if when I finish burning my backup to DVD, I change this date, the next time I look at this, I'll be able to see if I've added any music and know if I need to do another backup. And when I do, because it's picking based on the recent date, it's only going to ask me to back up the stuff that's been added. So let's just say that between now and September the 1st, I add 20 songs. Those are going to be in this playlist. I can then back that set up. And I can very quickly look and see how many things have been added and how much space it will take. This is almost like doing an incremental backup. Uh, it's really good if now I have a habit of using something like Carbon Copy Cloner to back up my iTunes library periodically. But sometimes you don't want to do that. You don't have time to do it. Um, this is a quick way of getting your library onto a series of DVDs. And as you can see, I'll go back into this editing list here, edit the smart playlist. By changing the date, I can very quickly change what's in this list. And all I have to do each time is change my target date. Just for the sake of argument, I want to see how much stuff I have added since last December. So I'm going to go ahead and put in December of 2015, December 1st, 2015, and let's just see how much stuff I've added. And it's probably going to be quite a bit because I had to rebuild a little bit of my library at one point. All right. All right. As you can see, here's quite a bit more material. And it changes based on what I set that date for. So that's a good, quick, and dirty way for you to be able to know what you've added to your library and be able to back it up quickly to a series of DVDs. My guess is that probably if you add to your collection regularly, you'll want to do this um, with using DVD as your backup media until you get a hold of a hard drive and in theory, you could back up your whole collection to a series of DVDs. And one of the things you may notice is this: when this is populated, when this playlist is populated, up in the left corner, right next to the name of the playlist, is a little piece of artwork. Now, you may not be able to see it on the screen, but what this piece of artwork is right here is the album artwork of 3 or 4 of the albums in this playlist. When you look at the second one, see, notice it has something different here. So, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of one of these because I don't need two playlists named backup. That would cause a little bit of confusion for me. I'm gonna probably in the near future, probably not this coming week, but in about 2 weeks, talk a little bit more about playlist and smart playlist and some of the things you can do with them in iTunes. Just to give you an example of something that I've done before, I had a script going at one time that launched iTunes for me and started a particular genre of music playing. And I had to make a change because to the script because what would happen is when I started my playlist, when I started the one for the main playlist, the first album in the list was the Aaron Neville Christmas album. And I really did not want to hear Silver Bells, in the middle of July. It was the middle of July. It was 90 something degrees outside, and I really did not want to hear, Jingle Bells, uh, Here Comes Santa Claus, or any of that. So, and so, and my wife is not a big fan of Christmas music in July, so that did not work very well. You turn on the stereo and it's blasting, even if it was a Chuck Berry tune or something like that, it's not what you want in the middle of July. So what I did is I started another playlist that had everything in our music library except the holiday stuff. And that way, when I started that playlist, I could shuffle it and I wouldn't have to worry about hearing Christmas music. And if I wanted to get to the Christmas music, say it's getting close to the holiday, then I could have my little script and run the one that says holiday, in which case it would then go down and it would launch iTunes and start the holiday music playing. So a lot of that was based on playlists and smart playlists. So we'll talk a little bit about that probably in 2 weeks because it'll take me a little time to put together a coherent show. And that's this week's tip, guys. That's going to just about do it. I had hoped to have a couple more tips stashed away, but I thought you might want to see this one and know that you can still kind of kludge together a backup to disk function. I would love it if Apple would change that burn playlist to disk function a little bit so that you had a little more control and it didn't go looking for a disk. I'd settle for having it either giving you the choice. Do I want to burn it to the disk or do I want to uh, pass it on to some other type of media, such as a hard drive. And that would give me a quick and dirty way to do incremental backups without having to have third party software. But until they fix that, this is something that should still work for you. And I did this, I put this idea together this morning in about 15 minutes using the current version of iTunes. So if you're saying, okay, I don't have iTunes 10, you don't need it. In fact, in iTunes 10, it almost does this for you. So go ahead and give this a try. It occurred to me at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was not real thrilled to have that idea pop into my head at that hour of the morning when I was trying to go to sleep. But at least I remembered it when I woke up this morning. All right. So go ahead, give that a try. As I say, in a couple of weeks, I'll have some more ideas for you, some things that you might be able to do in iTunes that are pretty helpful. And until next week, look for me in the forum. Pass on any great ideas that you have for things that you'd like to know about. I've enjoyed having you with me this week and hope to see you in the forum. Until next week, this is your Mac Forum video chat host, Sly Dude. I'll see you in the forum.